Any others? All right, moving on. Beaver County Regional Council of Government.
My apologies, I did not get the minutes in before the deadline. I did receive the minutes later, but I'll just put it in for the next meeting and then we'll get them. So unless there's any other questions, they did have a meeting. Did you happen to go, did you go to that Rochester? They did have their last meeting. I was not able to attend either, but it was at the Rochester Mental Health Society or facility over in Rochester. So it seemed like a good meeting from at least what I read from the minutes.
Were they talking about mental health?
They, yeah, and then they got into the regular COG meeting, but they basically toured the facilities and got an explanation of what goes on there and the daily activities of the mental health facility. And then they just had a regular COG meeting afterwards. Yeah, so they're planning on a couple of different tour trips this year, and that was first. So I know they're going to BCRC in the future, and then I'm not sure when they're starting to do that, but yeah. So, but I'll have a better report for you. I'll submit the minutes for the next work session, and hopefully have the March ones with you for them too.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
Are they gonna continue to talk about that? We've talked about that fireman's insurance.
Yeah, actually, our next meeting is on Thursday. This Thursday, so we'll get that on the agenda for sure.
Any others? All right, moving on. Civil Service Commission. Well,
Only thing is that there's some correspondence with Jason Foster and the group that they're just moving forward on the promotional test for corporal, which would be sometime in May. They're gonna start the process. There's a 60-day chance for studying and so on.
who is going to be the contact?
For civil service.
Mm-hmm.
Jason's helping out since Midge left, but
Yeah.
Mr. Todd, Jim Todd's the
Okay.
the head guy. Sometimes he's not available with traffic, so we use Jason.
All right. Any questions? All right, zoning hearing board,
There's no hearing board scheduled at this time.
planning commission.
Can we request an update from the planning commission? It's been a minute since they've come in, and I know one of the things that we requested from them in 2024 was a 5-year plan.
Yeah, so one of the things that the planning commission, it's under mine, but I'll bring it up now.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. As the planning commission actually is just about to finish up on the sign ordinance that they were tasked to work on. But they asked that if anybody from council's interested to attend the next 3 meetings or one of the next 3, so they can at least get you up to speed, because they feel that the time allotted in a work session or a council meeting, that they take up too much time and it's detailed, so they want to make sure that Rebecca will send out the dates of the next 3 meetings to council, so that at that time to address anything that they want. One would be the sign or the 5-year, but they just asked if we would attend. Sporadically, everybody want whatever, but we checked with Garen, and there was no problem with all of council, or if there's more than, a quorum or for under the sunshine, since we're being invited there to discuss their matters.
Okay.
And Dan, if we would bring that here and present it, it would take too much time.
Correct.
So that's one of the reasons we'd like to see the council members come to the planning commission.
Correct, and it's strictly an informational only. There's no decisions to be made at that meeting. It's
Right.
just they want to inform council where they're at on the sign ordinance. They put a lot of time and effort into bringing that, as Rick has too, with Dan, to working together to get it up and moving. So, but we'll get the dates out to.
Dan, question for you, and maybe Rick too. Heard you mention planning commission and a 5-year plan. Typically, they have on their schedule a 10-year plan. Is that, are they also gonna put together a 5-year plan?
No, the 5 was, that's my fault. The 5 was what
That's
we had.
a council plan.
Correct,
Oh,
yes, sir.
sorry, I said 5, I have it on the brain.
That's okay.
I meant 10.
Yeah, the 10 is.
10-year for the planning.
For the
Yes.
comprehensive.
Because that's a required
Correct.
required planning commission.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yep. And we'll get those dates out to council.
All right, any others? All right, tree commission. Anything from the tree commission? Code enforcement?
You have my report. Do you have any questions?
Any questions, comments?
I know that the graveyard, the cemetery is Vanport technically, but is there anything we can do? They haven't really moved a brick on that thing for, do we know what caused that and why?
It just fell.
It just fell?
Yeah.
Because now I'm worried about if it just fell, does that mean that whole rest of that wall
Well,
is?
I think they're looking into the rest of the wall to make sure there aren't issues. They did a freeze and thaw and the water got in under the cap. And that's what
Yeah,
caused it.
they're soliciting to try to get it fixed now, but they don't wanna just fix that open spot
Yeah.
and then fix that and then the rest of it, so they got a can of worms on their hands as far as what they're trying to.
It doesn't look like they've been doing anything there, and it kinda looks,
Yeah.
not the greatest.
Well, I would
entrance to
say
the-
the weather would probably have something to do with that too, especially, like Tom said, they're trying to figure out if the rest of the wall was damaged too.
That's strictly Vanport.
Right.
But, yeah, I'll stop and talk to them tomorrow.
I appreciate
Find
it.
out what they intend, yeah.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Rick. Historic Architectural Review Board, you have anything? Report? Municipal Authority.
I'll give you an update on two items, and only two items. The one is, we have continuing discussion with Bridgewater regarding them as a customer of our sewage treatment plant to handle all their wastewater. There's been some discussion in the last few years, and we continue with that to try to come up with a mutually agreeable way of billing, and that they're satisfied with, that Beaver Municipal Authority is satisfied with. And that discussion is gonna continue in court on May 2nd, in front of Judge Ross. So, we will have further, as I said, further discussions, which include the courthouse. The other thing I wanted to comment on is that we are finally in the process of finalizing and getting in the final stages a new line, a conveyance line for our sewage treatment plant. And this, for those of you that don't know, all wastewater in Beaver eventually ends up at one point on Beaver Street, Beaver and River Road. We're putting in a new line then from Beaver and River Road down to the sewage treatment plant, going under the railroad tracks. The reason this line has taken so long to get in is that it's extremely difficult to get permission to tamper with anything around the railroad
I
tracks.
was gonna ask you that. How's that
And,
communication?
That takes a long time,
Right?
and with kudos to Dan Mortone for his perseverance in making this happen. But, I think we can all understand that Norfolk and Southern, which is the railroad down there, we want them to be cautious about issues associated with safety on their tracks. And it didn't take too much encouragement. They are extra cautious about it, and it's caused considerable delay. But it looks like we're going out for bids. Did we go out for bids yet on that, Rick?
Not that I'm aware of, Mike.
So we're going out to bids on it this
Good
month.
progress though, finally.
Right. And that'll be a big improvement because we know there's some damage on the existing line which goes over the hill.
And Mike, where's that money come from?
Comes from ratepayers on the municipal authority.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else, Mike?
No, that's it.
Any other questions for Mike? Comments? All right. Pool committee.
We did not, I think the meeting, the January meeting minutes are in the council packet, and we did not meet, they canceled the February meeting, so unless there's questions on that, nothing further to report.
I just have one question. I had somebody ask me if they wanted to, coordinate a fundraiser for the pool, like an event. Who should they contact?
Judy, I'd contact Judy, I have to look up her last name. we have a meeting on the first Monday of the month, so they wanted to stop by and propose their idea. I'm sure we could take it into account.
Okay, cool.
All right, going to council committees, finance. And this is where if you have questions on Alex's 5-year plan, I think would be appropriate now to ask them.
Yeah, so the update from finance this week is kind of the carryover from the February work session where I had brought in the Beaver Boro 5-year budget planning discussion guidelines. I had handed that out in that meeting, and then Alex was unable to be here, so we decided to delay until Alex could be here because I think back in December, he had shared suggestions to reduce spending and oversee expenditures and generate new revenue. So I thought maybe, Alex, if you're cool with that, we could start there if anybody has questions or if you want to talk about any of that.
Sure, how would you like to proceed? I guess would you want me to?
My guess is people, let me ask the council, do you remember this document from Alex? Yeah?
One of the things that would be helpful in going through this is to have Andy's financial projections
have it
alongside.
So,
So I want to get just qualitative and strategic feedback, and then we'll build out the 5-year. And then we'll
you mean
bring
the
that in
projections this
discussion.
year, Margaret? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, last year I had asked that Andy do what he had done before, which was do sort of a 5 to 10-year projection of what our revenue stream looks like.
So Margaret, we have that. I want to have a discussion with you guys for input before you start looking at the numbers, so we can put a proposal together and bring it in, so we're not just looking at a flat projection just based on historical trends. I want to prioritize things.
I understand.
Because we did that last year, and look where the budget ended up.
Right, but I haven't seen the project, I thought we were waiting for the taxes to come in, and I haven't seen anything from Andy.
So I did get an email from Andy because I had some questions for him. And the email that he sent to me was, number one, as far as the overtime with the police, we are to the good. And which is encouraging because that was part of the reason we needed to cut down on overtime, which it's doing so far, and we're only a month and a half into it because we wouldn't count January. The other thing that he had mentioned is last year at this time we were working in a deficit, and this year we are not. We're much further ahead than a deficit, but I didn't get an exact number. He did say in April is when we'll collect, because we just started getting the tax returns in. He said by April, he'll have a better idea of like our savings. We wanted to replenish that. He's gonna have a better idea of what that is going to look like, which he said looks fantastic right now. So, but again, if we have a hillslide, of course that damages things. But by April, he did say that he would have some numbers that he could give us some more solid
We have them
projections.
already, but what I want to do is bring strategy into the conversation instead of just looking at a straight trend, because a straight trend isn't going to help us. So what I'm looking for from you, and what I think Alex was looking for, is feedback on the ideas that we've put forward.
Well, I can just go through kind of casually or quickly. Kind of the things that I brought up. The first was the police. Now, we did hire a police van, another officer. So I believe that brings our count up to 15. Is that correct? Is that 15 full-time? So doing the math, we have, 75? Like each one work 5 shifts a week, so we should have 75 shifts that should be able to count.
Three of them are in the schools.
Right, so,
Yeah.
but we could count that all into effect. And then
Sure.
in the school, so we should take all that into consideration when, and even with vacation time and stuff like that, knowing that since our busy time, like the school, is during the school.
Right.
In the summer, we don't have the school, so we have
People to fill,
officers freed
right.
up, so it would
Yes.
be, when available, you know, it's obviously more preferential to take time off and do things
Mhm.
during the summer because that's when we have the most manpower.
Yes.
And we also have special events and things like that too, so, but considering the manpower we're getting from the school, at 15 officers, that should be, I think we need to make sure that those are being, you know, in line and that,
Right.
yeah, everything's effectual. I think it was 360,000 we have in for overtime pay this year in the budget, is that correct? Is that what it is? So, I mean, this was a real shock to me when we did the budget because that seems like a large number. I remember talking to Dan years ago when Shell was stopping their program and I was like, well, you know, I'm worried that the officers are used to making all this overtime, that they won't have an opportunity to make this overtime. And the comment I got was that they didn't, you know, you advise them not to buy any boats or anything, you know, to spend the money correctly. And
Yeah.
but now at $360,000 in the budget, at 15 people, that's $24,000 worth of overtime every year that an officer could be entitled to make and still be within our budget.
If you back off though, in all fairness, the SROs, if you look, the SROs, their overtime between Bo, Greg, and Frat, their overtime's minimal. I'm one of the 15. I'm straight, I get no overtime. So when you
Yeah.
look at that, McCoy's running a schedule on 9.5 guys. So you have 15, and then you have DeGory that's doing the different things as well. So Ken's running a schedule that really requires more than that, and he's doing it with 9.5 guys, 10 guys. So, yeah, the overtime, there's not myself, the SROs. So again, I see, if you look at it just that way and project those numbers, as kind of Amy's saying, then yeah, it's these, but there's a story to each one, that's all.
And I certainly don't have any problem with the officers, and especially getting that much amount to the budget, because that was our doing. We put that in the budget. And when I'm used to budgeting things, the idea if I receive a budget, the idea of my budget is to spend that money. Because if I don't spend that money, the next year, they're gonna say, well, you didn't spend the money, so we need to make cuts, and your department is where cuts were made. And so, we're gonna basically penalize you for.
Not on the policing now, like I said, I take exception. It's not like a steel mill where guys come in and guys are coming in to fill a shift. We have the officers have 5 weeks vacation, sick time, workman's comp, different things like that. It's not, hey, it's overtime, who wants to work this weekend? There's none of that. It's the guys come in strictly to work. The guys have court. There's a third-party event, something going on where another officer's needed, a school event. So no, go ahead, Ken, you do the schedule, you jump in.
Real quick, to give all of councils some understanding of the scheduling practices currently. We did meet with Councilwoman McKean, and she is aware of this.
I am.
And I believe Sean is aware of it. At the start of the year, there were two things that transpired. One was the new hire. The original proposal was if you had 2 full-timers, you would be able to reduce the overtime, because the majority of the overtime that was taking us above our maximum amount was generated from being forced to fill open shifts that had to be covered. And the reason for that nowadays is because part-time, which you used to have to cover it, there's very limited availability of part-time officers, okay? So we had the one, and the first month into January, I met with Dan and the mayor, and we discussed ways to reduce the overtime. Now, I have 2 roles, obviously. I'm the sergeant in the department that runs the schedule and most of the operations, but I'm also the president of the union. So it put me in a position to work on both things, okay? And one of them was, we decided that we could shift some of the scheduling and reduce 40 hours of schedule per week and still have the appropriate amount of coverage. Now, there's details, like if I would explain it, basically we would have a minimum every day of 9 shifts a day, okay? 3 3-11s, 3 daylights. So what I did was I shifted. We got 2, 2, and 2 all day long for those 3 time periods, and then hours at night from 3 AM until 11 in the morning is typically our lowest amount of man coverage, which is 2, which is 2 less than any other time period in this jurisdiction and the other 2 that we have in the history of this area for policing. There was always 1 in each area. Either way, I was able to get the union, which by right, they could file a grievance over taking away the 40 hours. They understand the circumstance and what we were attempting to do, so they waived that. They decided not to fight it. And by contract, we have to give them 60 days notice. We gave them 30 days notice. They agreed to it. They just agreed to go into it as soon as possible at the start of this year. So January was under the old schedule. That's why someone had mentioned we can't use January's numbers. It was filling all the open stuff. Now, we went to the very brand new schedule at the beginning of February, and there's been a significant reduction in the overtime related to open shifts, which is what drove overtime costs last year. The overtime where you'll probably see an increase in, or of the same amount, will be something like court time, which you can't, if a guy writes a citation, you have to pay him if a court hearing is scheduled for it. Same with a criminal arrest. That's an area that you can't really control. And then investigations. The big area that drove over probably 60% of the cost was the open shifts. They're to a minimum now. So, and Dan also had me create a hybrid shift. Once we got the schedule made, and there were some areas where you could throw in a traffic car because of the way the schedules rotated, the guy was extra, but we had to get him his day, his 40th hour that week. His shift is a traffic shift. What's been happening with that, which is nice, is if there's a call-off, it's understood that the traffic car is now a duty car. So that covers potential overtime of that day. It's also good for advanced scheduling for different mandatory trainings, which in the past might have caused overtime. There's times where it won't cause us overtime because I can say the traffic car is the duty car, this is the day you're scheduled to go to your training. So we definitely took a proactive approach to it, and we're almost 2 months into it, and even Andy had discussed with them within the past week how much of an impact they've seen recently in the reduction of the police overtime. So what we wanted to wait and do was until we had about 3 months worth of data, and then we could compare February, March, April of this year compared to last year.
Yeah.
And it still will be reduced even with the raise in wages this year. So that's good. I mean, that's, and if you needed, if an individual council person needed to sit down like Councilwoman McKean did, we could sit down and go over it with you, but it would require sitting and discussing it, not in a meeting and me taking up all your time.
Yeah, and I think as long as we're updating this, what Amy's proposing is, along the same lines, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's, I think council's at fault for some of this too, because we didn't have an oversight and let
But you
overtime
can't,
get out to.
I do want to put out there though, you can't have oversight on police overtime for the good majority of the overtime. You just can't.
Why
You know,
not?
Well, because, so for example, when we had the murder happen in town, you know how many thousands of dollars was spent on overtime for investigation? Traffic court, any type of court, a police officer has to go to court. That court, they could sit there for an hour, they could sit there for 8 hours. I mean, those are things that you cannot control. You can't control that, Alex. Now, the one thing that we could have controlled, and I agree with you, where it was council's fault, we probably should have hired the police officer sooner than later, because we were looking at it from just strictly overtime. We weren't looking at it from the standpoint where we had open shifts we had to fill going into the week. We had, I can't remember what the number is,
But you had part-time officers.
and that's
a
the other
whole
thing, and that's what we lost, with the part-time police officer that used to fill those open
60
shifts.
and 70 hours a week were covered by part-timers. There just doesn't exist anymore, and that started the whole nexus of the problem.
So if council overlooked anything, it was that, and I agree with you on that, but the other parts of the police overtime, you just can't control. I mean, it is what it is. You have a traffic accident, and Ken McCoy's at the end of his shift. He can't just leave the traffic accident because he's gotta come in and punch the clock to time out. He's gotta he's gotta complete that investigation, which could be hours.
I understand that, but that was not what he mentioned in his explanation. What he mentioned in his explanation was that,
so then, I'll agree with you then. As far as the open shifts go,
So we
We
can look
should've-
at that, and we can
Yeah.
try to.
and
find
we
out.
addressed it, did we not?
That's what we're doing now.
So I'm saying our actions from last year, we addressed it.
No, we didn't address it last year. Last year, we put 360,000 in the budget for this year.
We
It's actually
addressed it as far
255.
as moving forward to this year by hiring the police officer to cover those shifts.
I think I need to
That's
be
my point.
corrected too. The number's 250.
250.
250, not 360, 250.
It's two
Which has
fifty-five
been,
in the last.
but it's been
version I have.
250 for the last, how many years? Several
It
years.
actually wasn't, it
Yeah.
was higher last year,
Correct.
and that's when we discovered it.
Exactly.
That's where the 360 came from, and that's when Todd and I sat down with you and Andy and went through the actual overtime receipts. And then we said, if we bring in another police officer, we can reduce this.
Yes.
We came to a 255 number and we put that in the budget.
Correct.
So in my estimation, what Alex is saying is right, in that we have to identify what these hot buttons are, and that's what this quarterly budget deep dive is that
Yes.
we're gonna do.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to have this conversation before we put numbers in front of you, so we can kinda highlight those. Go ahead, Ken, sorry.
I just wanted to say, I wouldn't blame that, like, council did anything wrong leading up to this. You're talking about, your needs didn't change, but what changed was the availability of part-time that for years mitigated these circumstances where you wouldn't see huge increases in the overtime because we were giving those shifts to part-time officers that were available. That's not the case in this industry anymore, or this profession, whatever you wanna call it. For decades in Pennsylvania and several other states, you go to other states, they don't know what a part-time police officer is, okay? But Pennsylvania, they permit someone to be a part-time employee as a police officer, even though they're working full-time hours and everything. You know, they're paid at a lower rate, they don't get the benefits, time off, anything like that. Since about 2020, when the whole national dialogue with law enforcement began, there was some significant changes that just now you're seeing the repercussions from them. And part of that is people not getting into the job, so there's less applicants out there. And then because of that, they're hiring full-time in most locations that wouldn't hire for 10, 15 years at a time. So now it's just, things have shifted. Your needs haven't, but the industry's shifted. So it's definitely more, probably 90% full-time, 10% part-time anymore, where in the past it was probably 40% part-time in most places, especially for municipalities and stuff. So it's not like you did anything or mismanaged anything it was all of a sudden this issue here, how do we address it?
Exactly.
You know,
That's
yeah,
all right,
yeah,
yeah.
it-
We haven't covered it,
didn't-
frankly.
Like, I think like the conversation should be, how do we address this moving forward?
Yes.
But there were multitude of factors that created this scenario. So that's, you know, like when you're sitting here bemoaning, hey, you've been on council for long, you didn't have this problem until recently, but it's because we were paying part-timers. That's why our overtime costs were kept down. We don't have them to pay them. We have very few part-timers.
We still have to be vigilant.
Absolutely.
We used to have 5 to 6 part-timers working 40 hours a week on average. Now we have 1.
I understand, and that might have to make us make adjustments somewhere else too, you know what I mean, because we only have so much money to.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, and that's why we're addressing it the way that we did, scheduling wise, to keep the cost down.
All right.
And I do wanna remind you, we do have contracts bringing over $700,000 for our
Correct.
police department, we cannot ignore that. Like,
And the school
that often
contracts.
gets overlooked, but that is a part of our budget, that is a part of our financing of the police department. I mean, that's a big part of it. So,
And the
It's
SRO
significant.
contract is
Without
paid
it,
for
we would
Fair.
have to
the
make
entirety
significant changes
of
to
the
make
officers.
it work.
Right.
right,
And
Sean.
actually, that brings me into my next point, because, you know, I was driving down the road, the other day, and, right by McDonald's, traffic was not moving that quickly, and, the person in front of me plowed right into the person in front of them. And very innocent accident, but it, you know, caused damage, and I'm sure the police had to get involved. There's debris on the road needed cleaned up, and foresee these problems happening more with the developments that are going on in Vanport. And now that we're discussing these things, we're probably gonna have to talk to Vanport because of those, their developments, and I think it's going to cause us more traffic and probably more crashes and other
You mean
police
the
incidents.
sheets?
Yeah, the sheets and the.
Yeah, so, but that's gonna add a, I certainly don't have the answers, but that's going to add, if it happens, cause I'm not sure where they're at with it, but there will be a traffic light added along that stretch, which I think would be very helpful. Because you figure, so you figure from the beginning of the graveyard going towards Vanport, there isn't a red light until you get towards the middle of Van Buren Homes. And
Yeah.
I see it a lot, I mean, people do pick up some speed in that area and that, but with that traffic light, I think I would slow that down a little bit more.
And I think my point is that, Vanport was, under my assumption, probably not that difficult of a place to police that, but now that it's, there's more development there, it might be.
You might wanna wait till they turn the first shovel, cause you notice everything's been sitting at a standstill for quite a while, that's all,
Fair enough.
that's all I'll say.
All right, fair enough.
No, but that's a good call out for 5-year planning, because if there's an increased police requirement in Vanport due to development, we need to plan for when that renegotiation happens
Absolutely.
of the the Vanport contract.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, like, good evening.
Which is a part of the discussion.
Move on to properties.
Anyway.
Yep.
The next thing I brought up was properties. One of the things we have done since I've been on this council was acquire a bunch of properties. So, I think we need to reevaluate those properties because those are part of our capital. If, worst comes to worst, we always have property that we can fall back on. And like, with the pool house and other things that you have, you see, I have, grant, applications, but we also, what are the value of these properties, are they, and what are the values of us holding on to these properties, and is it better to keep them as part of the borough or to, sell them, and if we do sell them, I think we need to make, we need to focus on keeping those properties as, tax revenue properties. We don't, because right now under a municipality, they're not, making taxes. The other thing is I think we need to consolidate real estate. My one goal would be to try to, since we have a pool house now, is make the pool house more of a community room, make this more of an office room, and have the upstairs to, rent out to other businesses, lawyers, financial advisors, people that might need just a small office and don't wanna have a large overhead, to renting a large space. So, I think that's something hopefully in our 5-year plan we can look at, because there's plenty that needs to be, done. And I think this building is awful big for all of us, and Andy keeps asking us to find ways to generate revenue. That certainly would be a way to, generate revenue.
I don't disagree with you necessarily, I think it's worth looking into, but the other thing to take into consideration, any renovation to this building, it would have to become fully ADA compliant, which means an elevator would need to be added, which the last time we checked into that, and that was probably 10 years ago, it was a $3.5 million project, just for the elevator. Now, I'm not saying that should be a deal breaker, but $3.5 million is.
That's correct, just to
Well,
to correct that, Alex, so we had Dan Franos, if you remember, he came here in 15, and I have it here, it was 1.2 to 1.3, and that didn't even address all the sewage issues in the basement that we currently still have. So 10 years, so you're probably pushing that number now to do at 3 million. We have the study and it was already done and we paid for it when we looked at bringing that, and that same theory about upstairs and moving stuff around. I mean, you wouldn't cut loose with, $3 million, it doesn't address the foundation and all the issues we have in the basement, so that's just, just for conversation and, for down the road, but.
Well, yeah, I think that goes in our 5-year plan too, because of property value and property assessment. We have to realize that, is this a viable building for us? Is this going to, is it going to, can we make, necessary modifications to it to keep it viable, or, is it better to, look somewhere else and do something different, so.
And we did do a study on that property, how, rental and stuff.
Just one.
But,
Yeah.
well, yeah,
Yeah, we, I think you were here when I went over that, the 471 corporation, so I think if we need to do that on the others, we can.
Well, I think we just
Yeah.
gotta keep it in our back pocket.
Yeah.
Gotta keep looking at it. And the ADA, we're not grandfathered into that ADA, we're just, been lucky with compliance so far.
It's a really good point, though, about this building, because this is a liability, and we know it's a liability. We've had sewage in the basement, water damage. It's, for the long term, some investment in this building has to happen, and that should tie into whatever the future use of the building is, if it continues to be the Boro building or not. It's an expense that we own, so we have to, that's a really big topic to
As
talk
is the
about.
fire department building, we had to do a roof, HVAC, the generator needs upgraded, that's $30,000, so there's a lot of,
Yeah.
meaning facilities, when you say buildings,
The new fire station building needs a new roof.
No, we did all that, I'm saying, the building's 32 years old.
Right, yeah.
So
This,
it's,
that one.
the fire
That one's
station.
already 32 years old.
That's correct.
How old am I? My lord.
Well, yeah, so what I'm getting is just, that's the heaters are going, the different things down there that keep the fire bay, when the trucks come in, they're iced up in the winter, we just had to replace those emergency repairs, I told you. You get a call Christmas Eve, it's $1,800, it's $3,000, and things that have to be fixed down there to keep the fire department. So-
I do think some of the 5-year plan that we need to talk about and align on is a plan for them to raise funds beyond the 5K. And I've said it multiple times, I know there's some passionate points of view about it and some perspectives on limitations because it's in a residential neighborhood, but many volunteer fire departments raise money in many different ways all throughout the year, and I think that we're missing an opportunity there.
Well, we gotta keep in mind too, that it's a completely volunteer force. So, the 3K, I couldn't tell you the dollar amount, but I know they do bring in a lot through that. And they do some other fundraisers throughout the year too. But we just gotta be careful that we're not overloading our volunteers who protect and serve residents when needed, for other things too. I mean, they have personal lives too, so we just gotta be careful with those demands.
Could there be a committee for the fire department like there is for the pool that helps raise money for the fire department?
I think the Women's Auxiliary, does that through the fire department. I would
Well,
think.
and again, this brings us to another conversation, not for tonight, but I'm gonna throw it out there, it's no different than the different places have the fire tax, 0.00 some percent goes, then you have it for the library, so it doesn't come out of your budget, it's earmarked specifically for, people know when I pay this percentage of X amount is going to the fire department, this X amount is going to the library, this X amount is going to the parks, so again, that's a conversation for budget time, but that's one of the things we've discussed.
Yeah.
So, just to throw it out there, we can
Yep, no,
discuss it
good.
later, that's all.
And I don't disagree with you, Amy, I just,
I know,
when
it's
we're
discussion.
asking guys, I mean, and those volunteer firefighters are down there more than just getting calls. I mean, they're doing maintenance on the trucks, the hoses and all of that.
Training.
I never realized how much time that they put in, so.
They put a lot of time in for compliance training, more and more
Yeah.
every year.
Mhm.
In the old days, they just showed up for a fire and did some basic training, but it's not the same.
I mean, everything that they utilize has to have preventive maintenance done on them monthly. All of those fire lines, things like that they use.
But I
so.
can ask them though, too, to give me something, on the building material maintenance, and at least we have something for upcoming, so we have something, and I'll see if they can provide something, or, not a wish list, an actual what they need to keep,
have.
correct. Yep.
Because I think the one thing, sorry Alex, that's gonna come up is the ladder truck, and we've talked about that quite a few times, that whether or not they actually need that, and that's gonna be a sensitive topic.
Sure.
Yeah, I think there's other avenues you can look at the ladder truck, but, I would say from a cost perspective too, that the fire department is major part of our discussion, especially during the roundtable, and this is not just a problem that Beaver's having, but problems that
Everywhere.
all fire departments, that they're having trouble, generating just like council, the problem is generating revenue, volunteer, membership is declining, and expenses are going up, because now you're talking about trucks that cost $500,000 to.
$500,000?
Yeah.
One and a half.
Better buy two of them for $500,000.
So, and before that was not the case, it was
Right.
like,
Couple,
yeah, you could get away, it's like, and now and every community is kind of anchored to have these types of things, so, and that's one of the talks about, is regionalization, at least shared services with the fire department, because, even a lot of times with and now I'm off until the subject, but, even like a lot of times today, just with volunteers and who's here, and what
Right. Staffing.
manpower is, there might be a fire in Beaver, and the first department here is Vanport, because there's somebody from Vanport that's closer to the station,
Right.
getting their truck quicker than someone from Beaver can, so,
Yeah, it's not good times there.
Yeah,
It's not good
it's-
timing.
it's definitely a big discussion in the COG, just about every meeting. Somebody brings something up during the roundtable, section about fire department, so.
Okay.
All right, office personnel, I just think office personnel is doing great. I know there is, but I think we need to kind of hold back on any more office personnel or any, one of the other things too is, the raise again, which I think was well deserved, but if we're cutting corners, I'm not getting a 5% raise this year, that's for sure. We have to be a little bit more in sync of what's going on. And I think a lot of this actually could come back to council to kind of take a look at this and maybe vet the process a little bit better than the way it was presented to us at that meeting, because it was, to me, that was something that maybe general government should have been discussing of office personnel and raises and duties and make sure everything's covered, but that's nothing that we ever got talked about under general government, and in fact, I think it was the recreation chair who made the motion to make to up the percentage, so.
But you gave the solicitor a $22,000 raise.
That's,
Tax collector.
I'm
Tax.
sorry, tax.
right, we
Tax
can get to,
collector.
that's a different subject, but certainly we could talk about that if we want to too.
And
So-
you guys passed it, you voted yes for it.
You're right, I did.
Yes, you did.
And you did not, right?
I did not.
Right, and Amy
Neither
did
did
not.
Amy.
And Amy did not, right?
No, she didn't.
So we had our two financial people vote against that when the rest of the council did.
Right.
So once again, that's why things should kind of go to council, because council did not really get any opportunity to discuss that. That was done by,
We sat here that whole meeting and told you what it would be, everything that spelled out how her raise would work.
Understood, that's not
And
the
you
way.
still
Hold on,
voted for
hold on,
it. You
guys,
s-
hold on. Can we continue on just talking about the plan? Let's not talk about past votes.
Well, actually, it's actually written right in here, I have it written in to bring this up, because that's something that probably should have gotten looked at by council before that date. I don't know why it wasn't. That was brought to us by the solicitor, the financial advisor, and the manager, and that, to me, is kind of more council responsibility than their responsibility, and that should have been, if not from you guys, then either general government or that should have been talked about in committee before. We need to vet this whole process, we need to work on it, and it was brought up last minute, and we're getting a lot of this stuff brought up to us last minute. The police contract was last minute, the tax collector was
Negotiated it for a year.
We worked on the police thing for a
That's
year.
what I'm
the
saying.
vote was last minute, the vote.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I understand it was going on for a year, but the vote was very last minute. It was,
I,
yeah.
What was last
The
minute?
only thing on the tax,
So-
that was last minute for everybody due to a
Yeah.
mix up of a date.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's
Exactly,
right,
and
which
that's
was
your
So it
explained.
was last minute
Which
for
was
us.
But there seems to be a trend of last minuteness.
No, see, but Alex, you're speaking from your opinion, and that's fine, but we did talk about the police contract for over a
Yes,
year.
but the police contract,
So,
That'd
when
be
the
done.
vote came up, I mean, we had already discussed it.
yeah, but when the vote came up, they were already receiving their contract 15 days before before the vote came up, so.
Which was deemed appropriate by our solicitor. So, I mean, I know you had issues with it, but, you know, again, I don't wanna continue to talk about the contract and the
Yes,
negotiation
let's
of
not
it.
relitigate everything
Yeah.
from last year, let's just,
Yeah, I wanna move forward and talk about
That's
Are we-
fine.
how are we making
1000%
better
agree.
decisions in the future according to your
The
plan.
way we do that is to have this stuff before us ahead of time, in a much more timely fashion. So we're not sitting there, wondering whether we're breaking any type of,
well, that gets back to
But
one
that
of
was
the
simple.
points
The
you made about
solicitor
the
said we
committee
weren't.
structure here at council, and going back to that.
what's
Yeah.
that?
Going back to the committee structure here,
Well, yeah, I'm not against the work thing, but I think that needs to be brought up through committee, and there's,
If you wanna go back to work sessions, or committee meetings, that's fine. However, the complaint was when we changed it to a work session was nobody, and we probably have the data to prove it, nobody attended the, committee meetings. And it was just the people who were in the committee, and that's it.
Or the meetings were canceled,
Or they were canceled, because there was a lack of participation.
or there was nothing to discuss.
Right, so, just saying, as the president that, worked with council to do the work session like school boards do, the reasoning was to have the public more involved, so they could hear more of the discussion, because how many different committees do we have? We have, what,
4 or 5 meetings plus a council meeting.
Yeah,
And
so-
some were canceled and people couldn't make it, you didn't have enough for.
So, can I make a comment on that? I think that the quarterly budget review that we have agreed is driven by the need for more accountability being placed upon council members. We just haven't had our first official quarterly meeting. This is the last work session of Q1. We will have that first budget review in April, that we're working towards it. So, I feel good about that. I think
Andy
It's-
does too.
Which is the
Yeah.
whole goal of
it's a
this.
lesson learned.
The whole goal of
Exactly,
this.
exactly.
Right.
So we're trying. Let's all work together to get there.
if I can make a point on committees, if you look at your agenda for tonight, we have council committees and absolutely nothing listed underneath, the council committees. What I'd like to see is maybe dividing things. Matter of fact, the work session that I missed, I was actually, upset because I actually saw, like, under general government, it had, the discussion about the finance of mine in there. I said,
Oh, it was under
that's-
finance.
It was that, or it was under finance?
Yeah.
But anyhow, to me, I think we need to see more of that. I think we need
I
to break
agree.
that down.
Hold on, there is communication sent out a couple of weeks in advance of the meeting for the committee council members to put anything on the agenda that they want mentioned. So Rebecca's only putting on there the information she's given.
Yeah, I think she's doing a great job. I don't have any problem.
Well, I'm
with
just
that.
saying, like, I don't want it being, like, we're
No, I
we're
think
purposely
it's-
not doing
No,
it.
yeah,
It's to the chairs
the
of the
chairs, I mean,
committees.
yeah.
Exactly, so that's why under general government, you saw that because the council chair,
It was under finance, I put
Or-
it on
If
there.
anything,
Whoever.
Rebecca's probably doing a little,
She's doing like
more
2
than her
jobs
share,
right
yeah. More of that stuff should come from the council and more ideas. I mean, you look at all these other authorities and things, I actually have to, hand in reports for, the pool committee and, for the COG, but we never see any kind of reports or anything under these council committees. I think we could use quite a bit of improvement to kind of
and then
maybe
when
stack
we,
some things underneath.
hold on, and when we had council committee meetings throughout the month, most oftentimes, there would be no report, so, again, that's why we wanted the work session together,
Then
but.
the public complained that they didn't know what was going on at the committee meeting, because because there was no committee meeting, so
Right.
it was double-edged sword. So this
Right.
was the best alternative that we came up with as a council. Mr. Dilo, we had discussion trying to figure out how do we get the public and council engaged, and what we came up with was to try this method.
Right.
Like Sean said, if you wanna go back, it's one less meeting that Rebecca and I have to attend. If you wanna go back to your committees,
How
knock
does
yourselves.
everybody else feel
Yeah.
about that on the other council? I mean, on the other
I think there's
committee?
gonna be even more disconnect, but that's your decision. That's just my opinion.
I don't think anybody's recommending it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
seems like we're the
Certainly
only
wasn't me.
ones having the conversation. I'm looking for other people to engage.
I just think, I just think the committee needs to be more, if you're gonna be listed as part of the agenda, you need to be part of the meeting. I mean, you need to have something, you need to bring something towards this council. What Amy did brought something to this council. What I'm trying to do here is bring something.
What if the
towards
committee
council.
doesn't have anything, as they say, there's no report, there's nothing, no action, so why go out and create something and
Well,
if there's nothing there, you're gonna.
There's always nothing there. You need to have a little bit more guy, you know.
So when there is
Yeah.
a need for the meeting, we are contacted to attend a meeting.
No, I think we could do it right in this
Here.
meeting. I think we could do it in the work session, but when there's a discussion about general government, or say, then Roberta should be basically saying, bringing the, topic to discussion and leading that discussion on the general government. Kind of like what Mr. Dila does with the, municipal authority, but that's, once again, it's not a council committee, but if it was, that would be about the.
And there are some committees, if you look at the committees, I mean, there are some committees that always have things to report, finance, highways. You know, those are two of the, you know, busier issues. Public safety's busy when we're doing a police, contract. You know, if we're in the middle of a police contract or something like that, or we're discussing, new equipment or whatever the case might be, then, yeah, those things are added and discussed in the
Yeah.
meeting.
I
Just
mean,
like they would have been in the separate meetings.
I guess my recommendation then would be like, if we could get that stuff listed beforehand, that would be better, because if we're going to be having conversations about it, we should know about that beforehand, instead of a committee chair just coming up in their report and saying, oh, hey, this is what we're doing.
Rebecca sends an email out a week and a half before that she's doing the packet Friday, does anybody have
Yeah,
anything?
yeah.
And if they don't respond, Rebecca can't, she sends it to all the council, hey, I'm gonna do the packets Friday, if you have anything, please let me know.
I guess this is my plea to the committee chairs, that they need to be doing,
I agree.
they need to put a couple subtext underneath their things, just so we can have a discussion about it, instead of bringing it up at the meeting and kind of surprising everybody with what the report is.
But I will say, I think that the committee meetings and discussions that we've had have been beneficial and okay, if you think that there needs to be more communication through an email, then I would advise too that, you know, there's some members that never look at their emails, which I'm not saying is appropriate or inappropriate.
No, it should be here.
I think, you know what my observation.
I'm just saying, when the email's sent, or the agenda's sent, again, there are, you know, when there are things to discuss, it's on there, so I don't know, again, you're acting as though that every time you come to a meeting, if something's brought up through highways, it's a big surprise to you.
Can I just play devil's advocate a little bit?
Go ahead.
Just because, so for instance, like we've talked about park, I'm gonna pick on Whitney, she's not here, I don't mean to, but it's the one that popped up. Like, I've asked for pool house updates, I've asked for, like we've talked about park equipment being run down. It all ends up coming back to finance because we're so budget run, but there's more that the committees can be accountable for, that finance can just either agree or disagree to, but we don't have to be the ones driving. That's all, that's my observation.
And I will tell you too, going through the experience of, ordering, new playground equipment, for example. And I'm not speaking for Whitney, but I will tell you, we had a guy, Ron Embaugh, that used to do that, because he was the recreation chair. That takes time. So he may be looking into, it could be the cost of what a new swing set will cost. And he's going to 3 different companies. Now, this isn't a full-time job for Ron. It's a volunteer position. And it takes time to have that communication. So when he's waiting for 3 different companies or what have you to give him bids of what a new swing set would cost, that could take a month. It could take 2 months.
But that's what the staff is here for, is to say we want this, and that there's co-stars, there's things that councils, that Rebecca can do, and a few emails that would take a council member 2 weeks to do, she can do in 15 minutes.
Right.
Colette can do, I can do, somebody can do, we can make phone calls, call the engineer. So, you know, a point's taken.
I think the question
yeah.
is though, is that the only way it can work? Right, because then that's more work on the office team, and, you know, all we're saying, you know, let's talk about the crosswalks.
Mhm.
Like, the crosswalks is an ongoing topic, the only update we ever get on it is from the borough manager rather than the public safety committee.
And
So-
Bob
that could just
Bob
be-
just checked with me recently, asked her how the grant was, and we're waiting on the grant to see, you know.
Yeah, I'm not asking to litigate,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, those are the kinds of things that could make this council more engaged and then have a better understanding of the budget.
It's always been a challenge trying to figure out what's the right level of engagement for council members on individual issues. I mean, before I got on council back in, a little over, many years ago, I hear stories about the meetings always lasting until about midnight.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
Tom, I guess you can verify that.
Midnight or more past that, and I will tell you, the length of the meeting doesn't then equate to the quality of the meeting. I
So-
strongly believe that, I
So-
agree with what you're saying.
One of the things we tried doing was to cut down the length of the meeting so that we get out of here in the last couple of
Yeah.
years.
It has, yeah.
Now, what goes along with that is then how do you engage council on the individual issues? And so what we had was individual committees, 1 meeting a month, 1 business meeting, and then have individual committee meetings. There's advantages and disadvantages of doing that. And more recently, what we decided to do was to eliminate, formal committee meetings and go with this work session. And, we're talking about that right now. Hasn't been, it's not perfect, none of these things are perfect, but it has been, typically it's gotten us out of here before 10 o'clock at night.
Right,
So,
but.
which I think has been a driving factor
It has
all
been.
along on trying to make, how
It
do you,
has
how do
been,
you
but
keep
there's a
people
lack
up
of-
to date? How do you keep people up to date and informed, and yet, time is used efficiently and not having all-night sessions?
I think I'm looking for a happy medium there, because, that's exactly what we want, because I think there does need to be some more, committee involvement in these work sessions,
Okay.
where the committee's driving it.
Can we go on to the next?
Sure. Maintenance, I think we can skip over, because, well, right now, we're down a maintenance guy, correct? So,
Yeah.
and if they're okay with that, then I think we're okay with that. I don't see that being
Yeah, we're
okay for forever.
No,
I think
we're
at some
holding-
point, they might have to add somebody, but if they're cool with that.
No, we're holding the
I think
line.
we should thank those guys, and like I said, every time I see them out in the winter, they're out there, thing. Solicitor, engineer, treasurer, this, we'll get back to, kind of that one thing we're talking about with the tax collector and with the committee assignments, where I think the committees could be doing more in the work session. And we seem to give a lot of our assignments to the solicitors and engineers and treasurers first, and then we kind of just sign off of them after they, especially with the solicitor, say, oh, we have to do this, the solicitor will go and look at other ordinances and things like that, and then come back to us, and that puts a lot of, which is very convenient for us, but it puts a lot of work on the solicitor. I think in most council situations, especially where you have people who, I think Aaron is actually doing a nice job for us, and, but when you have people who are on the payroll, and hourly payroll or subcontractors, I think council needs to be very frugal in the way they approach the tasks that they have. And council could do a lot of the groundwork. And the one example I'd like to use was Rick Sprecher and I, when we were writing the chicken ordinance, yes, that was, a big accomplishment. We did most of the groundwork, and
Mighty
I
fine job you did on that too, Ally.
remember, pardon?
Mighty fine job you did on that.
I thank you.
Kudos to Rick.
Chickens all around.
But after doing this groundwork, I remember Rick and I sitting in, Mr. Petrus's, Attorney Petrus's office,
There you go.
and he had 106 cigarette butts in an ashtray that was there, and like, and we gave it to Mr. Petrus, and he said, okay, this is good, we gotta change this a little bit to make it, and so most of that stuff was done, and Mr. Petrus really just spent a little bit of time to polish it, and I think that's basically what we need to do, I think. What
Yeah, but
we're
look how
doing.
long that took.
Right,
Couple of years.
so it was a couple of years, yeah.
So
I would be
efficiencies-
willing to bet that, and the reason why we made a change with the solicitor was we needed a solicitor who is better with efficiency as far as getting answers back to us quicker, by utilizing technology, which our former solicitor did not do, so of course that took even more time. I would be willing to bet that, and you guys did, you put a lot of work into it, and to be quite honest with you, it was a lot to ask of you. And I think it would have been done much quicker and more efficiently if we had someone who was like Garen. I mean, he's very well with technology, he understands law, and, I'd be willing to bet that that was a 2-year process,
Right.
2 to 3 years. And I think it would have been much quicker if our current solicitor was the one guiding us.
You know, just a comment, I've had an opportunity to work with a number of solicitors over the years, and I've also reviewed their charges to us, and we're getting a good bang for our buck.
No, that's exactly.
You're paying a third of what you used to pay, a
Yeah.
third.
And we're getting a good bang for our buck on the municipal authority. I
Yes.
should mention that too.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
got good representation, so we
Absolutely.
could be proud of it.
But yeah, all this stuff, I mean, that stuff should be generated from the, under the direction of council.
But under the guidance of our solicitor to make sure that.
Right.
Right, and I'm just saying that I believe his decisions would have been much quicker, and it wouldn't have taken 2 years.
Anything else like that?
Not for that, well, yeah, we can go into the big ones. Recreation committee, I believe, I'd like to see the recreation committee go into a standalone committee at some point and be able to raise their own funds and become independent of this council, so we don't, when we're looking to build, get money for a playground, we don't have to look at, necessarily taxpayers, but that could be part of it, that could be part of their presentation, but we can also have, we can also subsidize that with fundraising, with, special events to try to, and get them as more like a 501c that they can do their own fundraising and, kinda like what the pool committee's doing now, just for all of the borough. The other couple, and I wanted to mention that with the, like I said, getting back to the, council committee stuff, this is actually in some of the reports that were given. One of them was from the HARB committee. They said that they'd like to get together with the general government committee to kind of discuss their ideas for the HARB. Also, the next two things, other method of revenue, if you looked at under the planning commission, they're going under a signage thing. My thing was like, I'm not a big fan of these vinyl signs that are promoting events in Beaver. They're very expensive. They can only put one event up at a time. I don't think they look aesthetically pleasing. But I've got a lot of kickback on electronic signs. But I think electronic signs would give us much more, would enable us to publicize many more events. We could also use it as revenue generating. We could put advertising on there. And I did notice that was looked at under the planning commission. The other thing that was looked under, but the planning commission, and I have here in this report, I have it, was a more liberal alcohol policy that I was gonna say with the electronic signs, they're around, Rochester has one, Bridgewater, Vanport has one, Brighton Township has one, the school has one. It'd be nice maybe if we had one. Also, you see, with the, Brighton Township has, lax their, alcohol laws, and I think with the sheets coming into Vanport, you might see the same with Vanport. And leaves Beaver as one of the last standing, dry, things, and that's something, you know, if we're looking for revenue, that's definitely something that we can look at for revenue. So, but I think it needs to be in the discussion.
Save the best for last, didn't you? Repeal prohibition, that was my favorite.
Repeal prohibition.
I don't mean to laugh, it's a very big issue that would be very interesting to explore, but challenging to execute.
Well, I'm kind of curious to see what the planning commission says, since they're looking at it too. I felt like kind of, after putting in this report, the last thing I wanted to put on there was that, and then people kind of just shrug off the whole report because I put on,
Yeah,
you know.
put it first.
But I think it needs to be just part of the discussion. If it doesn't go far, it doesn't go far, but, if we're really looking at, trying to gain revenue from other, resources, that's
Yeah.
obviously one staring us in the face.
Okay, cool, thank you. So if you shift over to the 5-year budget planning discussion, I think I can get us through, what I wanna get out of this really for tonight is just feedback and ideas on some of the themes that are in here. So our goal is to align on our priorities on tax planning and on major costs, get out ahead of those through 2030, right? So that includes major cost drivers and infrastructure planning, things that we've just been talking about around highways, around hillside, just infrastructure, the buildings, the real estate. So a lot of that analysis is going to happen. I think, Alex, your list was really helpful. I think a big thing that we will have to talk about and be on, on the same page on is if Dan were to retire, and I don't know when your plan is to officially retire, we have to have a succession plan in the budget for that, not talking about personnel. The budget would change pretty dramatically, and I think everybody hopefully in this room understands that, because there's significant cost savings with the way Mr. Magbar has allowed us to pay him, frankly. So I think that's an important one, and Dan, I'm not putting you on the spot, but your thoughts when the time is right around the timing of that. If it's not in the next 5 years, fabulous, but if it is, it's probably about an $80,000 increase. Okay.
Better, you might wanna double that number, but.
Yeah. Development of new revenue streams, so Alex brought up some of those. There's other things that we have talked about, putting parking meters back in. There's other opportunities that have been bantied around a bit. Anybody have any on the top of their mind that Alex or I haven't talked about?
I think before you mentioned parking meters, I think you need to do research on what it would cost to reinstall.
Yeah, we would.
And-
I just
yeah,
wanna get
I'm just
ideas.
Well, parking meters are obsolete, there's parking enforcement, sometimes the cost of that is astronomical for what the money you bring in.
Right.
People are getting away from the parking meters is the thing,
Sorry, pay for parking is
It's very-
just an idea,
It's
right?
very
So,
expensive.
understood, and Mayor, you talked about that with Sewickley
Yes.
two meetings ago, understood. I just wanna put everything out on the table, and because I want us to be transparent with each other and have talked everything through, so we don't get this tension all the time, right? There's always tension, and it seems like
It's all directed at you.
yes, it is.
Well, that's part of it.
It's not my favorite thing.
Well, unfortunately, Jim Perini went through that for many years. He served as the finance chair. I mean, unfortunately, you guys are giving us the real dollars and cents,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes it's good news, sometimes it's bad
But
news.
also what people have to understand, these aren't Amy and Todd's numbers.
No.
borough's numbers and they're your numbers as the taxpayers, we're paying your bills as the taxpayers with the X amount of dollars. Again, when the streetlights cost $6,000 a month to keep on just for street. Again, people, when you tell them, oh, I didn't know that. So yeah, the money that's being spent is to keep this business running. Your streets good, all of your infrastructure in town, and it's aging. And, you know, we just didn't plan years ago for the water and sewer lines, this new sewage and water, just different things. It just so happens, everybody on council now is taking the brunt of these things. That's.
So in this plan, we'll take a look at when those big incremental hits have happened, and we'll plan for an incremental hit. We may not know what it's going to be in 2 years, but we need to have budget in the capital fund to be able to fund that. Okay, and then of course, expected tax increases and timing. So the major revenue trends right now, property tax, obviously, business taxes, state and federal grants, the SRO contracts, and then the police contracts. So we've already highlighted things like if there's increased police activity due to the development in Vanport, we need to be prepared to encourage our government to go back and renegotiate those contracts. Some of the minor revenue trends that we have that I think we could be looking at. Pool house, parking fees, permits is, I'm not sure, you know, when, I can't tell you, I should know this, but I can't tell you right now, when the last time permit fees went up, and if we've evaluated those, and if there are other things that we could be permitting for. So I think we should be looking at that. Citations, I know that the response I often get on this is that it's costs us more to write more tickets and police red lights, people who run red lights, things like that. It is a problem in this town. I don't know the other way around it. There are other things like dogs off leash, dogs feces in the parks, people not picking up. There's other things maybe we should be looking at being a little bit stricter about and trying to reap benefit from that. And then we did talk about the capital fund being put in a high yield interest or CD. Anything else that's not on that list that you want us to be thinking about as we prepare this first view, which we will go through in a month's time?
Is there a amount that we're looking at for this CD, when we get to a certain amount, or we're putting something, you know, are we reserving, are we saying, as soon as we get to this amount, we're gonna put it in a CD, so we have a rainy day thing, or?
I don't have a number, but we should talk to Andy about it.
All right.
So part of why we wanna do this in April is because tax revenue is hitting now, we should have a pretty good view by the end of April, and then talk to Andy about it. Any other thoughts or ideas that have been talked about in the past that you wanna make sure that we look at while we're building this? Okay. This projected tax increase timing, it should not say 203 years, it should say 2 to 3 years. So I think we are going to have to look at, you know, evaluating reserves before we adjust taxes again, but probably within this 5 years, we will have another tax hike, especially if cost of goods and services continue going up the way they are.
I think one thing to note, Amy, that it's going to be very, very, very minimal compared to.
Correct.
The biggest complaint, nobody really complained to me about the taxes. What they complained about was, Dan, why so much at one time? Well, it wasn't done appropriately over the years, and it caught us. That hillside put us on our back, and we were stuck. That was the biggest complaint that I had. Mayor, you and I don't know, I think that's what, you know, we get it, things go up, taxes are gonna go up, we get that. But man, why so much at one time? That was, so I think what I got from people, hey, we get it, you know, $0.25 and it goes up for $50. Okay, I get it, things go up. But, so I think, just to quantify what you're, to the public, yeah, they're gonna be, but it's not gonna be, that's why we're having these discussions amongst council to make sure that this, you know, when you look at that tax sheet, when you don't raise taxes for 6 years at a time, we wanna make sure that doesn't happen. Again, it just goes up ever so slightly
Yeah, I agree.
to keep,
I mean,
keep
and-
our pace, that's all.
And just to make sure everybody is remembering that, we had detailed discussions with options that were lower amounts, and that where we ended up was what was agreed by the majority of this council. So I think, thank you, Alex, because we talked about a lot of these big cost drivers, personnel, infrastructure. But then there are always unplanned costs. So I think we're already doing a better job of talking about unplanned costs, like this cold winter, the snow, salt costs went up, things like that. We're keeping a record of those unplanned costs and now showing where they're gonna end up in the budget. That is something we had not done in my time on council. Maybe it happened before, but we would talk about it and it would just happen, but there was no record of it. So now we can go back to see in the quarterly report that Todd and Andy and I will present. We talked about fire department costs. We have to get out ahead of that, so that would be great. Other police equipment costs. So we have a few things with tasers, body cameras, the vehicle rotation, so we'll have to make sure that's all clearly planned out. And then existing debt. So I just want to make sure that, you know, I am not going to be here after this year. So this FNB loan is something we agreed very clearly we would pay down as fast as we could. And that pool house revenue is a priority to help drive payments towards that FNB loan. So we'll continue to ask for the pool house revenue projections and share those as much as we can. And then we have to plan for emergency reserves, like I said, and stagger infrastructure spending. I already talked a bit about succession planning, and that's really it. So we're gonna take a 5+5, so we'll look at 5 years back, and then we'll project out 5 years forward, but with intelligence built into it, so it's not just a quantitative trend. And then we'll work together on if we've agreed that certain committees can have ownership of certain financial decisions or infrastructure decisions, and that would be a shared joint way of working. That would make this work session maybe a little bit longer every month, but certainly more dynamic and more transparent. That was it. Any questions, any thoughts?
No, thank you. A lot of information.
Sorry.
All right, general government?
Good stuff.
There is their meeting.
Yes.
One thing, last year I had noticed that there were a number of old tires that got thrown over the hillside by the museum. And the borough put up some no dumping signs, but the old tires are still down there. I had asked that they could be removed, and before the vegetation starts growing, maybe somebody could go down there. Now I've pinged the Boy Scouts to see if maybe there's some kind of merit badge,
Right.
program or something that would.
Yeah, the only problem is getting a truck, I know exactly what you mean, to get a truck down along that other side of the tracks, you back in there, it's the railroad property, and it would, for us to take a pickup truck back, a dump truck, it's just the risk and the liability. I get the tires, but
I don't think you need to take the truck down there. I think if somebody can get down there and tie a rope around these things and just haul them up, I mean, that's a pretty steep hillside, but I think they could be hauled up pretty easily, and that's why it's not made to the Boy Scouts,
yeah.
so that none of our guys.
Roll them out over the railroad tracks. That hillside is mush.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, as far as them coming along the tracks, you used to be able to come up, drive, and turn around back there
Yeah.
to drive a truck, but then again, there's a lot of liability on the railroad.
Someone was down there today, ironically. I was walking.
That was
and-
me.
Yeah,
That was you?
That was me. I
Oh.
was just checking to make sure they were still down there.
yeah.
But, I mean, all you need to do is just tie a rope around these things and haul them up that ravine.
That's your
You
opinion.
just said a ravine, like, I'm not gonna have the highway guys aren't trained to go to do that type of stuff, and on the other hand, somebody gets hurt, it's railroad property, then again, we're interjecting ourselves and going onto the railroad property. I don't know, I can take a look at it with Brent to see what we can come up with, but, you're saying, I know right where you mean, and it is steep. Those tires have been there, I don't know if we can send a letter to the railroad to ask that they be removed. They have the truck that comes by on tracks, and it has, and it's to remove debris. So maybe if we make them aware with some pictures, and maybe we can shame them or guilt them into it or something, And, I agree, it's not gonna hurt to have them cleaned up, but then again, to risk our guys, you said ravine, which I agree, it is steep, they're tying ropes and they're pulling stuff, and, I would much rather see a truck just come up to the side. What would take 15, 20 minutes to throw those tires and get them out of there, we'll look into it, that's the best
Okay.
answer I can give you.
Nothing for general government, correct? All right. Highways.
Dan, did you have anything you wanted to report on?
Let me get this, yeah, the only thing is, I met with actually Dan Martone this morning, we went over and spoke about a couple different areas, and I know Rick and Dan actually put some time in going around and checking some of the different roads to try to come up with, some of the areas. If you remember, so our liquid fuel money is right around 135,000, but minus, just say 35,000 for the ramps that we have to pay for on Market Street, the handicap ramps that they're gonna would take that money out before we get it. So we're gonna end up somewhere around 100K, but we also put in the budget, somewhere at the 160, because we lowered it a little bit. So we're gonna have, $200+ thousand for paving. We have to follow Columbia Gas, which is gonna be College Avenue, a little bit on Wayne Street and some on Corporation. So that's all they're gonna do this year. So we'll have a little bit of money, but I wanna, Dan Martone's gonna come up with, kind of an à la carte. This road will cost this much, and we can kind of pick and choose what roads. We're also gonna go off of Rick and Dan's recommendation, kind of prioritize which roads are worse. But I definitely don't want to, okay, say we have 262,000, we need to come into paving and spend 260. I don't want it, I'd rather, try to keep it around the 200 mark, maybe a tad over, and keep that just like we did with the police cars. Keep that extra 40 or 50 to see where we're at the end of the year again, because come December, January, February, and March, it's stagnant for us. We need to make sure that, the planning so far, talking with Andy, everything, we're hitting all of our benchmarks, hitting all the targets. But I think moving forward for 2026, depending on what Columbia Gas does, we can't keep kicking the can. We've been spoiled, and I said it before, with Columbia Gas. They've been paying anywhere between 60 to 75% on the roads, and we've been following up, and we've got a lot of paving done at a minimal cost. But again, some of the areas Columbia Gas is in, we've been neglecting other parts of town. There's some stuff down on Oak River Road area needs done. You got 7th Street, Gailey, Jervo. You got a lot of areas of Columbia Gas aren't doing work, nor do they plan to do work in. And we've kind of been focusing all of our money and energy, a little bit of money that we did have. So hopefully, one of the things behind the tax increase was to build up the surplus, but also put enough money into the paving budget that we can spend, $200,000 and get ahead and get caught up on the paving. Talking to Dan, he was guesstimating that there's anywhere $500,000 to $700,000 within the next few years that we're gonna need to combine, not all in 1 year, but a cumulative, to get us ahead on the paving. Rick, you wanna comment? You took a ride.
We surveyed most of the town, except for the old side of the town.
Yeah.
We have to do that yet. Yeah, we've identified the best ones.
What are you coming up with, a good significant,
It doesn't seem to be that bad.
yeah,
It really doesn't.
good.
Dan, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I thought, and maybe I have it wrong in my notes, I thought for this year, we had, money from liquid fuels
Yes,
that was moving over into that.
yes.
Okay, but the Columbia will not be back next year, so from there forward, it's 100% on us.
Well, no, they're coming back, but a lot of
Okay.
stuff they're gonna do is gonna be in the sidewalks.
Right.
Because they don't want us to start tying themselves up with the brick streets, putting bricks on pallets. They lost hundreds of thousands putting bricks on pallets, and then the homeowners weren't satisfied, so they're trying to run everything they can through the sidewalks and staying out of the streets. So it messes us up a little bit, because they would do a street, and let's say the cost of that street was $50,000 to pave, they'd pay $35,000, and Boro's getting the whole street paved for 15. So those, I'm not saying those days are gone, but like, from what we're going, the meeting we just had with Columbia Gas, there's some plans, but I'd say, Rick, probably well over half, they're gonna try to do sidewalks to stay out of the roads.
Right. I mean, it helps out some of the homeowners
Yes,
It does.
where the sidewalks are bad. The Columbia Gas is gonna replace them.
Right.
right.
The other thing, they mentioned that they do plan to do the whole town at some point in time. And so major area that's left to be done is Ward 3, and that's on their 10-year plan. But they didn't say exactly where it's gonna fit in on their
Right.
10-year plan. So,
Right. And as things happen, a 10-year could
Yeah.
become a 15 to
yeah, it
continue.
can, and then they get, I mean, we see in the news every day issues about gas leaks in different parts of western Pennsylvania, and they get pulled off of these projects to go to, urgent hotspots.
But I do wanna give Mike, Dan, Dan Martone, and, Rick, all the credit in the world working with, Columbia Gas during that time. Because initially, it was on the homeowner for the sidewalk, and we had a lot of issues with that. And that was before I was on council. I remember being in a meeting, and there were some angry residents here, and rightfully so. And those gentlemen that I just mentioned negotiated those deals with Columbia Gas to where they agreed to pay for those things with the streets. And, many of our streets, benefited from that. The borough benefited from that,
Yeah.
having the majority of the costs go on Columbia Gas rather than the taxpayers. So, when things like that come about, we have to recognize that, and we did.
I totally agree, that was effective, that group working together with Columbia Gas. We got a lot of things done that, if they didn't do that, probably we would have wound up paying a lot more. So that's definitely was a big plus.
But also
And the
too-
gas company was
Yeah, I was
very,
gonna say-
Right.
they were very nice to us around town. They didn't wanna upset anybody either, but,
Columbia Gas has been a good partner. I mean, you figure, we got a lot of, Boro Park, a lot of the streets, complete rebuilds that we could have never afforded to rebuild some of these streets.
Yeah.
So it's been a good partnership.
Absolutely. But I wanted to make mention that there were people on council, and they did a tremendous job with that, so. Anything else for highways?
Nothing else at this point.
So, public safety,
I don't need anything else. Did anything else we should talk about?
Make something up.
First bullet point, nothing new. Second bullet point, still nothing new.
recreation?
Right here.
Okay. Manager, secretary.
We've
report.
covered a lot of stuff, but just a few things. Planning Commission will get you the dates for that. Also, Midge sent to council, she commented she was appreciative, but most of council appreciated, and was here for her getting that award, and that she was really touched by that. She sent some personal handwritten notes out to different people, and also followed up on some phone calls. But again, she wasn't expecting that, and it was a well-deserved, and she wanted to thank most of council for support. Fire Department 5K is on the 31st, so May 31st. Fire Department 5K, and the registration's open. There's also a registration form at your desk if you have yourself or a friend or neighbor or somebody. Feel free to do that or forward it on your Facebook or whatever you guys do. Continuing to work with John Kowalski. Yeah, Kowalski, the emergency management guy that took over for Mr. Perini. John's been working with his group on updating the emergency management plan, so we should have something adopted and moved forward on. So we're gonna hopefully have something here to discuss. Not sure, just the emergency plan, how much council, we'll make sure council's aware, but also too, it's an emergency plan that's just not to be outshared with the public too. So it's a fine line of what we can share on the emergency plan. So, but he's really updating it. A lot of the information is just old, and he's put a lot of his personal time and expertise on getting this brought up to speed on the fire department. And so I think Mr. Kowalski's gonna come into a meeting too, so we can recognize him. But the big thing, he can explain to council what he's been doing and where we're at. So Mayor, we're in good hands with John. You work with him.
Absolutely, he's the top in that field for sure.
Yeah, retired from down at the power plant, so he brings a lot of up-to-date expertise, for free of a resident, as you were saying, jumped in and, updated something for us at no cost, which was good. Upcoming motions that we'll have, for the next meeting would be on the fire department end, that life insurance to add them over. Again, it's gonna be, really, when I say no cost, cost neutral, it's actually gonna be about $2,000 to $3,000 less, and it's one less expense. Again, we didn't give the fire department a bump or anything, so this is a way for them to save money from having to spend any money and putting them on, and Colette researched it with the company, and we're able to do this, to add the, they call them active and inactive. So the inactive, in order to obtain inactive status from the fire department, you have to do 20 years of consecutive service and be in good standing. And there's a list of, I think it was 6 or 7 that, long-time people that have lived in town and have fulfilled that obligation in the fire department. And I want to say, I think they have 22 active. So the inactive and active would be added on to the life policy. So we'll have something for you for that. Last thing that I have is just to give you guys a right to know update. So for 2025 from the same requester, we've had 14 total submitted, but we've had 2 more since the last meeting. Requesting 66 types of records, and there's been 5 more submitted since the last. So we're just following up on that, and some of the council asked to keep them updated. So that's all I have at this point. Thank you.
Any questions, comments?
No, I just have one comment. I just want to clarify something I said I was incorrect earlier. In the 2025 budget, I happen to be looking at 2024. Police overtime is 360. Yeah. I had it backwards. Sorry about that.
So the last I knew was at 250, 255, 260.
Last year was 255. I looked at them wrong.
And that was with the second hire, we would have pulled it back to the 250 where it was.
Now we'll pull it back.
Correct.
That's not what we passed. We passed it through.
That's correct.
Right.
That gives an extra 100,000 in the budget.
We'll see. Let me talk about
We got a place for that.
Yeah.
I just want to be transparent. I didn't want to make a mistake there. Sorry about
No,
that.
thank you.
Mayor?
Nothing more to report.
All right, do we have anything from engineer?
Nope, Dan was tied up at another.
President report, I have nothing to report, and nothing from our solicitor. So at this time, meeting adjourned? Nope, sorry, go ahead, sir.
I moved to adjourn.
No.
I've seconded.